Let's now turn our attention to education, and experts, the public and educators are connecting through the radio and sharing ideas in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Every Saturday on Radio 2000, an hour is dedicated to the Peppa Ufunde education program. As Peppa Ufunde means learn and be safe, the Solidarity Fund and Zenex Foundation funded project profile challenges faced by the schools. They also look at solutions as they try to adhere to guidelines provided by government. To tell us more, we're joined by Professor Mary Metcalfe, who is on the panel of experts. Prof, once again, good to have you. Thanks again for being with us.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
So I'm glad that it's now focusing in on radio. We had you speaking to us last about the television programs that were launched, and I'm hoping that those are a great success. But I'll get an update from you in a couple of minutes. But right now, let's talk about this radio program. I mean, we know how powerful radio is. So talk about this one.
So the Solidarity Fund and Zenex Foundation, very correctly, I believe, identified the reality that school leaders are being faced with problems that nobody has ever imagined. They're receiving guidelines from the DBE and the provincial departments, but everyday school leaders are experiencing challenges which they are finding solutions to, because it's actually on the ground in the context of the realities of the school that school leaders are saying, this is the way I can solve my problem. And the Peppa Ufunde campaign is presenting to school leaders a platform where they can share their challenges and share their solutions, because school leaders as professionals are wrestling with these challenges and working out what works for them.
So we know that the program has already started. You've had some shows. How important was it to have a program such as this? And of course, as you have spoken to, using radio and television.
Well, first of all, it gives a platform for school leaders to be able to share their challenges. We found, as we've talked to hundreds and hundreds of school leaders across the country, that it has been a very difficult time for them, that they've needed to be able to express their frustration, express the things that are troubling them. But it's also been a rich source of learning from schools that are finding solutions. Our first episode looked at the issue of how do you lead under times of crisis? How do you lead when there's constant change? And we had Professor Al Witten together with Magwena Maluleka from SATU and Basil Manuel from NAPTOSA, talking about the importance of school leaders as professionals supporting each other. This week on Saturday, we looked at the very critical issue of psychosocial support, that there are learners and teachers who, as all of us under the pandemic, are anxious, are fearful. And this will play out in the behaviors at school, which means that a school leader may not necessarily interpret daydreaming, defiance, reluctance to cooperate as anxiety, and they may read it as misbehavior. So we need to create schools as caring communities where we listen to each other, where we create safe spaces, where we acknowledge the anxieties, but also build the routines, the predictability, the planning, the caring environment that will make it more possible to lead schools going forward in the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm quite interested to see some of the feedback that you've received from schools. We know that a lot of grades are back, and there's still some in, some out, alternating days and, doing whatever it is to try and catch up the syllabus. What is some of the feedback that you've managed to get from schools?
It's been very interesting to listen to them and to hear about the anxieties that they have. We know that schools are still puzzled about some aspects of the science, and next week we're going to be looking with the health scientists as key elements of what we know about the pandemic and what that means for managing schools. What does it mean for the standard operating procedures? One of the issues that really interests me is that in talking to school leaders, we're finding that learners who are losing touch with the school because they haven't been at school for so long, because they are anxious, is seeing rising levels of learner non-attendance. And we are worried that this may begin to dig in and be an issue that contributes to dropout. So we will be having a special episode on learner attendance, how to reach out to make sure that we create a space for learners to attend regularly. And we'll be joining forces with the Zero Dropout campaign, because this has to be something that as a country we prevent.
Yeah.
Once you've got the routines in place and you are dealing with issues such as teacher comorbidities, there's real challenges for school leaders in terms of planning the teaching, planning for learning at home, which is the new normal, how to plan for assessment, how to communicate this with families. And again, the guidelines exist, the guidelines are there, but what are the particular challenges in different contexts, and what are school leaders doing to step up, find solutions, and how can they share these with each other on the Peppa Ufunde website, on the Peppa Ufunde Facebook pages? How do we say, let's let school leaders lead? They are a national treasure. We need to thank them for the hard work that they're doing, support them, and build a community of support in the educational community.
We look at that school dropout rate, and it's absolutely frightening. We did an interview about that, I think, a week or two ago, and particular attention to those learners that literally disappear out of the system. There is no trace of them. We already have a high dropout system here in South Africa, and the stats speak to that. But now with coronavirus, it's obviously worse, and I'd like to spend a bit of time talking to you about that, but not necessarily during this interview. But I want to also look at the expectation. Obviously, there is a pending announcement by the President this week. We don't know what it is, and I don't expect you to know it either, but there could be a move to level 1 for South Africa. Does that impact education in any way? I think, obviously, as I mentioned, we still have alternating days for certain grades. Could we perhaps see schools now going back and trying to catch up as much work as they possibly can, all grades at the same time?
As you say, one can't predict, but if one looks at the resurging in other countries and the advice, to use the American expert of Dr. Fauci, he's saying that the epidemic is going to be with us for at least another year. That means that the basic tenets of keeping oneself and keeping others safe, which is physical distancing, wearing of masks, washing of hands, is going to be the norm for schools, I would say, at least until this time next year. And what that means is that physical distancing in schools, which are such large institutions, means that in the majority of schools, only half of the learners will be able to attend at a time. This means that there's huge new challenges for families to support learning at home, and huge challenges for teachers to plan their teaching so that they are introducing new concepts when the learners are in class, and preparing enough work for them to be working at home in a guided and supportive way with the necessary resources. One of the principals that we spoke to last week was talking about how the challenge is learners remembering what was taught when they were last at school, not only at the beginning of the year, but when they are in and out of school. And the trick to consolidating that learning has to be structured learning at home with the necessary resources. And that is a challenge for many families where there's not necessarily conditions for learners to concentrate, to have the resources they need, and certainly not access to the internet. That's the preserve of a minority of South Africans.
Yeah, it certainly is, and that is where this comes in, and we have the radio shows, we have the partnerships with the SABC and other broadcasters as well to try and assist where possible. I know that it doesn't take away that actual physical interaction with a teacher and a learner and in a class and learning, but it is trying to fill that gap. But I imagine that the main concern, whether we like it or not, is still the Matrics at this stage. How are they faring? What is the feedback on Matrics at this point?
There was a Matrics campaign, I think, is a wonderful initiative that's been very well supported by the SABC and the other broadcasters. Net and ETV are all come to the party, and they're streaming to all across the country at regular times, 7 days a week, intensive Matric catch-up focus, preparing the class of 2020 to write the National Senior Certificate. The reports that I'm hearing from the ground is that schools have embraced this. I've even heard of schools in KZN which have actually bought TVs in order to be able to receive the broadcast that's happening during school time. So this is a public interest campaign that so many people have come to the party to support. The funders have come and made sure that the broadcasters are able to do this. They've supported the development of content. The NECT and the DBE are working on a careful monitoring so that we know, are we reaching the learners? Is it helping them so that it can be adjusted? We're hoping that print media will also come to the party and will publish the broadcast schedule in print media so that as much as possible, every grade 12 learner can approach the exams in November, feeling that they have the support of the country behind them and they've been given a fair chance.
Then just an hour, that's I know the timing, so it's for an hour on a Saturday, 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning, Radio 2000. Sure, it's going to be running for 10 Saturdays in a row. It's a tight schedule, I know that. It's quite a tight schedule. I hope that'll fill a bit of the gap at least.
So Woza Matrix is aimed at learners, and that's 6 hours a day, 7 days a week. Peppa Ufunde is aimed at school leaders.
Okay.
And it's giving school leaders an opportunity to hear each other's voices, to be encouraged, to know that they're not alone, and that they must share their solutions. For me, the success of Peppa Ufunde will be when school leaders across the country are coming to the website and sharing their learning so that others can benefit from the solutions that they have found.
All right, we leave it there, Professor. Thank you very, very much as always. Professor Mary Metcalfe, education expert, talking to us about the Peppa Ufunde public education program. It's airing on Radio 2000. It's with Reggie Philender every single Saturday between 9 and 10.